Linda had worked at the roadside motel for almost 7 years, and in that time she had seen all kinds of guest-ruckers who stayed the night. Families on long trips, even couples who came and went in secrecy. But the pair that started showing up every evening around 9 p.m. was different. The man always walked in with a stern expression, his grip on the girl's shoulder firm, almost possessive. The girl herself couldn't have been older than 12 or 13, but there was a heavy weariness in her eyes that no child should carry. Every night without fail, they appeared together, and every night they disappeared into the same room. At first, Linda dismissed it. Motels attracted unusual guests all the time, and she had learned not to pry into people's business. But as days turned into weeks, the consistency of their arrival struck her as odd. They never varied the time, never interacted with anyone else, and never lingered in the lobby longer than necessary. The man didn't smile, didn't make small talk, didn't even acknowledge Linda beyond curt words like room for the night or cash only. The girl, on the other hand, barely spoke at all. She kept her head lowered, clutching a small, worn-out backpack to her chest as if it were her lifeline. There was something haunting about her silence. Most children Linda encountered at the motel were at least curious, asking about the vending machine, the swimming pool, or the free candy dish at the front desk. But this girl never once looked around. She walked like someone who had been told 100 times not to speak, not to look, not to breathe too loudly. Her shoes were scuffed, her clothes mismatched, and Linda began to wonder if she had ever even been given the chance to pick them herself. Something in her demeanor whispered of a child trapped in a routine that wasn't hers to choose. The man called himself the girl's new stepfather, a detail he offered once almost carelessly when Linda tried to make conversation. His tone had been clipped, like he wanted to shut down any curiosity, but his explanation only raised more questions. Why did they check in under different names every few nights? Why did he always insist on paying in cash, sliding bills across the counter with a glance over his shoulder, as though he feared being recognized? The more Linda noticed these details, the more her unease grew, like an itch she couldn't ignore. Still, she tried to shake it off. Maybe she was overthinking it. Maybe the girl was just shy. Maybe the man was just private. Yet, every night, as she watched them head down the narrow hallway to their room, she couldn't ignore the way the girl's hand tightened around the strap of her backpack, or how her eyes flickered just for a second toward Linda, as if silently asking for something she couldn't say aloud. And that fleeting, desperate look would stay with Linda long after her shift ended. Linda's cleaning route often took her past the row of rooms near the end of the motel hallway. The quieter side, where fewer guests stayed, that was where the man and the girl were always placed. At first, she walked past without thought, but over time, the silence behind their closed door began to feel heavier than the silence of any other room. It wasn't the peaceful quiet of guests asleep, it was a muffled, tense kind of quiet, as though something unspoken lingered in the air. Some nights, however, Linda began to catch faint sounds, voices, conversations just low enough to be hard to understand, but sharp enough to carry emotion. The man's voice was the one she heard most often, deep, commanding, with a rough edge that made even Linda standing safely outside shiver. His tone wasn't the voice of a gentle parent or even a patient guardian. It was the voice of control, of someone who demanded obedience. The girl's replies, on the other hand, were almost always soft, broken, or filled with stifled sobs. Sometimes, Linda would catch fragments of her words: please, apologies, whispers that seemed to dissolve into silence before she could make sense of them. Once, she thought she clearly heard the girl say, "Please, I don't want to do this anymore." That night especially haunted Linda. She froze outside their door, her cleaning cart sitting idle in the hallway, her heart thudding in her chest. What could the girl possibly mean? What was it that she didn't want to do anymore? Linda leaned closer, holding her breath, desperate to catch more. But almost immediately, the sound of the television blared from inside the room, drowning out every other noise. It was as though the man had deliberately turned it on to cover whatever had just been said. Linda stood there for a long moment, torn between knocking on the door and walking away. In the end, fear and uncertainty pushed her to continue down the hall. But the whispers didn't stop after that night. In the days that followed, the pattern repeated: hushed arguments, muffled cries, sudden bursts of silence that always ended with the television being turned up loud. It became a routine, just as unsettling as their late-night arrivals. Linda's ears had grown trained to pick up even the faintest sound, and each time she passed their door, her stomach tightened with unease. It wasn't only the words that disturbed her, it was the tone. The kind of tone that suggested the girl was living in constant fear, saying just enough to keep herself from angering the man who controlled her every move. Linda knew that guests had secrets. She had seen affairs unfold, watched arguments spill into hallways, even witnessed the occasional fight that ended with police being called. But this was different. This wasn't the drama of adults. This was a child, trapped behind a locked door, whispering in a voice too fragile to belong to someone her age. Each night, as Linda moved her cart past that room, she couldn't shake the image of the girl on the other side, small, afraid, and waiting for someone to hear her cries, and whether she admitted it to herself or not. Linda was starting to realize that someone might have to be her. It didn't take long for Linda to realize that the man was hiding something. Unlike other motel guests, who eventually allowed housekeeping to come in and tidy up, this man made it absolutely clear that no one was to enter his room. The Do Not Disturb sign hung on the door every single morning, without fail, as though it were glued there. Even on days when most guests would welcome clean towels or a vacuumed carpet, this particular room remained completely off. Each time Linda passed it with her cart, she felt an unsettling weight pressing down on her chest. One morning, she decided to be bold and lightly knocked on the door, just to offer fresh linens. There was a pause, and then the door cracked open, barely an inch. The man's face appeared, shadowed and cold, his eyes narrowed as though Linda had just crossed some invisible boundary. "We don't need service. Stay out." His voice was sharp enough to cut through the air, and the door shut again before she could respond. Linda stood frozen in the hallway, her knuckles still hovering in the air. She had been brushed off by plenty of rude guests before, but never with such aggression. This wasn't just privacy, it was a warning. From then on, she noticed how carefully the man controlled the space. He was the only one who left the room during the day, usually slipping out for short periods, never long enough to give anyone a chance to enter while he was gone. The girl, meanwhile, never stepped outside, never even cracked the curtain to look at the world beyond. Other children who stayed at the motel would run around the parking lot, splash in the pool, or sneak to the vending machine for candy. But not her. It was as if she had been confined to the shadows of that one room, forbidden from even glimpsing the daylight. Linda's instincts told her something was deeply wrong. Rooms that were never cleaned always carried a certain musty smell, and one afternoon, when the man opened the door, just a sliver to grab a delivery bag of food, Linda caught a brief whiff of the air inside. It was stale, heavy, almost suffocating, like a place where the windows hadn't been opened in weeks. She also noticed the girl, sitting on the edge of the bed behind him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. For a moment, her eyes met Linda's, and the expression there sent a chill through Linda's entire body. It wasn't just sadness, it was pleading. That silent look haunted her for the rest of the day. Linda knew what she had seen. A girl trapped in a locked room, watched over by a man who seemed determined to keep her hidden. But hidden from who? From the motel staff, from the outside world, from the police. The more Linda tried to make sense of it, the more unsettled she became. And though fear told her to look the other way, something deep inside whispered that she might be the only person who could notice the signs. And maybe the only person who could do something before it was too late. It was a quiet afternoon when Linda's suspicion took an even darker turn. She had been assigned to clean the room right next door to the man and the girl. The thin walls carried faint sounds, shuffling footsteps, a chair scraping against the floor, and now and then, the man's heavy voice barking an order. But when Linda stepped closer to the window of the neighboring room, something unusual caught her eye. Through the gap in the curtains, she could see the girl seated at a small desk. Her shoulders were hunched, her head bent low, and her hand moved quickly across the pages of a small, battered notebook. Linda froze, curiosity overtaking her. The girl wasn't doodling like most children might. No, her writing looked urgent, almost frantic, the strokes of her pen sharp and uneven. Every so often, the girl's hand would tremble, and she would swipe at her eyes with the back of her sleeve, smearing away tears before returning to the page. Whatever she was writing, it wasn't casual, it was desperate. Linda's heart pounded harder with every second she watched, her instincts screaming that this wasn't normal behavior. Children in safe homes didn't write like that. Suddenly, the sound of the door unlocking snapped Linda out of her trance. The man was returning. The girl jolted upright, her eyes widening in panic. In a hurried motion, she shoved the notebook under the thin motel mattress and quickly sat on the bed, folding her hands neatly in her lap. By the time the man entered, her posture was rigid, her face carefully blank. as though she had rehearsed this role many times before. Linda couldn't hear what he said to her, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. It was the same fear she had noticed every night before. But now it was coupled with a secret, something the man wasn't supposed to know about. Linda stepped back from the window, her pulse racing. A notebook hidden beneath a mattress didn't sound like much on the surface, but to her it was a clue, a sign that the girl was trying to reach out, to express something she couldn't say aloud. Maybe it was a diary, maybe it was a letter, or maybe, just maybe, it was a plea for help, written in shaky handwriting because there was no one she could trust with her voice. The thought kept replaying in Linda's mind, the way the girl had hidden it so quickly, the way her hands had trembled. Whatever that notebook contained, it was important. But Linda also knew how dangerous this realization could be. If the man ever found out about it, what would happen to the girl? That question gnawed at her with terrifying persistence. She couldn't stop thinking about the words that might be hidden in those pages. Words that could explain the mystery, words that could reveal the truth. And yet, for now, they were locked away under the mattress, just out of reach, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover them. Linda didn't know it yet, but that notebook would soon become the key to unraveling everything. That evening, as Linda wheeled her cleaning cart down the hall, she noticed something unusual. The man's door was slightly ajar. It was rare, since he normally kept it bolted shut at all times. She paused, straining to listen. From inside, his deep voice echoed, low and hurried. He was on the phone. Linda leaned closer, her heart racing with both fear and curiosity. She couldn't hear everything, but certain phrases slipped through the cracks like icy needles piercing her skin. Yes, she's almost ready. Tomorrow night. I'll deliver her myself. Each fragment twisted her stomach into knots. Deliver her. Ready for what? Linda's pulse hammered in her ears as she pressed herself against the wall, desperate to catch more. She knew she shouldn't be eavesdropping, it was against motel rules. And if the man discovered her, there would be consequences. But something about his words froze her in place. This wasn't the tone of a parent arranging a trip or discussing family matters. This was business. Cold, calculated, and terrifying. The man's voice grew sharper. Don't worry, no one suspects a thing. The motel staff doesn't ask questions. Linda's breath caught in her throat. Was he talking about her? Her blood ran cold as she realized that he believed no one had noticed, no one cared. And maybe, until now, that had been true. Linda had tried to ignore her instincts, to chalk it all up to paranoia. But this phone call was proof something sinister was unfolding behind that locked door. And the girl was at the center of it. Suddenly, there was silence. Linda heard the distinct sound of footsteps moving closer to the door. Panic surged through her. She pushed her cart forward as quickly as she could, pretending to busy herself with wiping down a door handle further down the hall. A moment later, the man stepped out, his phone still pressed to his ear. His sharp eyes swept over the hallway, lingering on her just a second too long. Linda forced a polite smile, but inside, her chest was tight with fear. Did he know she had heard? Or was he just suspicious by nature? She didn't breathe again until he turned and walked toward the vending machines, still muttering into the phone. But even as the danger of being caught passed, Linda's mind was spinning. Whatever delivery he was planning, it was happening. Tomorrow night. That gave her less than 24 hours to decide what to do. She could keep pretending she hadn't heard a thing, just another maid doing her job. Or she could risk everything to uncover the truth before it was too late. That night, Linda couldn't shake the words she had overheard. I'll deliver her tomorrow night. They looped in her mind like a haunting echo, refusing to let her sleep. By the time her shift was nearly over, her nerves were stretched tight. She paced the hallway, glancing at the man's closed door every time she passed. Part of her told her to walk away, to clock out, to go home, and forget everything. But another part, the louder part, insisted she had to know. Something inside screamed that if she didn't act tonight, the girl might never be seen again. Summoning her courage, Linda waited until the motel grew quiet, when most guests had either gone to bed or were lost in the flicker of their televisions. Then, she slipped outside into the cool night air. The row of windows along the building was dimly lit from within, and she crept toward the one she knew belonged to their room. Her footsteps were soundless on the gravel, her breath shallow, as though even the air might betray her. She reached the window, the blinds drawn but not completely closed, leaving a narrow slit of visibility. Trembling, she pressed her eye to the gap. What she saw froze her in place. The girl was there, but not sitting calmly as before. This time, she was tied to a chair, her wrists bound tightly with rope, her small frame trembling against the restraints. Her face was pale, streaked with silent tears that caught the dim yellow light of the lamp. Linda's stomach dropped. This was no longer just suspicion, no longer just overheard whispers. The girl wasn't simply being controlled. She was being prepared for something unthinkable. Linda's eyes darted across the room. And that's when she noticed the man. He was kneeling by an open suitcase on the bed, carefully packing it with items that made Linda's blood run cold. Coils of rope, wigs of different colors, stacks of passports, and bundles of cash wrapped in rubber bands. Every item spoke of planning, of movement, of secrecy. This wasn't the behavior of a father, step or otherwise. This was the behavior of someone hiding crimes, someone transporting lives as though they were possessions. And sitting on the bed, beside the suitcase, was the girl's notebook, wide open. Even from outside, Linda could make out the words scrawled across the exposed page in shaky handwriting. "My real dad is dead. He took me. Please someone help me." The plea hit her like a punch to the chest, forcing a gasp from her lips before she could stop it. She stumbled back from the window, her hands trembling, her mind racing. Every instinct told her she was in grave danger if he discovered her there. But one truth pressed harder than her fear: she was the only one who knew. And the girl's last chance of survival might rest entirely in her hands. Linda's breath came in sharp gasps as she stumbled away from the window. Her instinct screamed at her to run, but her conscience chained her in place. The words in that notebook page burned into her mind. "My real dad is dead. He took me. Please someone help me." For the first time, there was no room left for doubt. This wasn't a paranoid hunch. This was a child crying out for rescue, and the man inside wasn't a stepfather at all. He was something far more sinister. Linda's hands shook violently as she fumbled for her phone, but her fingers felt clumsy, her breath shallow, as though her own body was resisting the terrifying step she was about to take. She darted back, inside the lobby, her eyes scanning the empty hallway, half expecting the man to storm out and catch her in the act. With trembling hands, she dialed 911, her voice cracked as she whispered into the receiver, her words tumbling out too fast, too frantic. "There's a girl, she's tied up. He's not her father. Please, you need to come now." The dispatcher's calm tone tried to steady her, assuring her officers were on their way, but every second felt like an eternity, and Linda couldn't shake the image of the man finishing his packing, dragging the girl out, and vanishing before help arrived. Her fear became reality when she heard movement. From the far end of the hallway, the man appeared, gripping the girl by the arm. Her wrists were hastily freed, but raw, the red marks still visible even from a distance. The suitcase was in his other hand, the zipper bulging from the weight of whatever he had stuffed inside. He was moving fast, his jaw tight, his eyes darting around with paranoid sharpness. Linda ducked behind the front desk, her heart pounding, so hard she feared the sound alone would give her away. She could hear his footsteps growing louder, heading toward the exit. Then, flashing lights pierced the darkness outside. Red and blue danced across the thin curtains of the lobby as police cruisers pulled into the lot. Tires screeched, doors slammed, voices shouted commands. The man froze mid-step, his grip on the girl tightening as he whipped his head toward the noise. For a single, breathless moment, Linda thought he might try to run, might drag her into the night and disappear into the shadows before anyone could stop him. But heavy boots thundered down the hallway, and within seconds, officers surrounded him. Their shouts were sharp, their weapons drawn. The man's mask of control finally cracked as he raised his hands, his suitcase clattering to the ground. The girl stumbled forward, collapsing into the arms of one of the officers. Her face was streaked with tears, her body trembling violently, but she clung to him as if he were her only lifeline. Linda remained frozen behind the desk, watching it unfold with wide, disbelieving eyes. The truth was unraveling right in front of her, and with every passing second, the reality grew darker. This man wasn't her stepfather at all. He wasn't even family. He was something far worse, a predator who had stolen her life and nearly succeeded in taking her away forever. And as the suitcase was pried open, revealing its disturbing contents under the motel's harsh fluorescent lights, the scale of the nightmare became clearer than Linda could have ever imagined. In the days that followed, the motel was no longer just a roadside stop, it became the place where a nightmare ended and a life was saved. The girl was taken into protective custody, finally free from the man who had stolen her identity and her childhood. Investigators uncovered that he was part of a larger trafficking network. one that had already moved countless victims across state lines. The suitcase, the wigs, the passports, all of it was evidence of horrors that most people never imagined could happen in plain sight. Linda's testimony became the turning point. What began as a maid's uneasy feeling grew into undeniable proof that exposed a predator. Authorities later told her that if she hadn't acted that night, the girl would have been gone by morning, disappeared into the shadows forever. That thought stayed with Linda, a chilling reminder of how close the child had come to vanishing without a trace. For Linda, life at the motel was never the same. She continued her work, but now, she watched with sharper eyes, knowing that evil doesn't always hide in dark alleys or abandoned places. Sometimes, it walks in through the front door, smiles at the staff, and pretends to be family. And sometimes, all it takes is one person brave enough to notice the small details, lowered gaze, the silence, the trembling hands to change everything. The story of the maid and the girl spread far beyond the small motel. People shared it as both a warning and a lesson. Pay attention, trust your instincts, and never underestimate the power of speaking up. Because behind the locked doors of ordinary places, there are secrets waiting to be uncovered, and sometimes, someone's life depends on whether or not we choose to look closer. And so, what began as just another shift for Linda ended as a night that would haunt her forever. But also a night that gave one girl a second chance at life.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.